There we go.
Hi, Ben.
Hello. So I'm Ben. My partner Sarah will be joining me shortly. She's a little under the weather though, so we'll see how that goes. No, we're early. Okay, thanks a lot. So this is going to be a very informal live demo. Fingers crossed nothing breaks, but I suspect that's not going to happen. We're just going to run through the software a little bit, and we encourage people to interrupt with comments or questions as we're going. If we're not clear doing something, you can say, wait a minute, can you go back and do that again? Right, things like that. Sarah and I interrupt each other all the time, so you should feel comfortable doing the same thing. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen.
And I usually talk a decent amount, but I have a post SAA cold, so I may not be as participatory as I normally am. So apologies.
Yeah. So a little bit of background. Sarah and I run a platform for collaborative transcription and indexing called From the Page. And it is used by libraries, archives, museums, historians to work with with documents, fundamentally archival material, archives and museums, in some cases printed material, in a collaborative manner, right? Our platform allows anyone with a web browser to be able to contribute and discuss what they're doing. Most of our projects are large kind of public crowdsourcing projects in which volunteers from the general public are invited to come participate. There are also projects that are run with a select group. So for example, the Archives of Michigan is working with their Daughters of the American Revolution chapters to transcribe World War I index cards. We also see scholarly projects in which you'll have a small community of scholarly editors working on papers.
And sometimes those sort of projects actually span, they have the public do their initial transcription, and then they have, editors, academics,
graduate research assistants and things like that.
Kind of do the editing and annotating paths. So it's kind of a neat public-private collaboration.
Yeah, it's one of the things that is fun watching that is that you have these graduate research assistants that are all grad students with history backgrounds, and they are in theory experts at doing the research on the people in the documents, but they find that the members of the public are actually better at reading the handwriting because those tend to be retirees and people who have a lot more experience with cursive. So let's dive in and take a look at how this works. So I'm going to start with a project at the Wisconsin Historical Society. That is, and they run a number of different projects. This one is a set of citizens petitions from early Wisconsin. And we're going to jump right in and work on transcribing something. Okay, the first thing that I'm going to do here is kind of go to full screen, make this a little bit bigger. I'm going to move the image to the top so that I can transcribe a little better. And now I can read this better. So we have a place to view the image and we have a place to type. So let's type to the Honorable of the and we're not going to complete this. I'm going to go ahead and save. I'm not going to mark it done.
You misspelled. What did I say that you misspelled?
Was it Rainy Memorial? Legislature. Okay, let's fix that. And we're also going to add an extra line. Okay, we will save that. Okay, so as people transcribe text, every time they hit the save button, the software records their changes. So you and anyone else who can see the project can come in and view all the changes that have been made to this page. So you can see on July 20th, Wisconsin Historical Society uploaded the page. August 2nd, you see my initial typing with the legislature, which was wrong. And then you see the revision that was made in which legislature, that we got rid of the T and then we added that in their opinion. So as people are doing this work, you can see what everyone's doing. They can see what they're doing. Definitely for volunteer-based projects, we see that the volunteers can be very territorial. They want to do a really good job. They don't want other people coming in and doing it wrong. And so they will review each other's work and correct it or improve it. A lot of times you'll have people come in and say, hey, I can't read this. Can somebody help me out? And then someone else will respond and read those words that they were not able to read themselves.
Can you show where you would do that?
Yeah, so every page at the bottom of the transcription screen, we've got a place for transcription conventions. And then at the bottom, there's a place to leave notes and questions. I'm not sure whether this particular project has a lot. It's a brand new project. Okay, so there's just one example of someone leaving a note saying this is incomplete and needs review. We'll dive into a few others as we go through this. Any questions as I go? Again, feel free to just jump in. So texts like this, these petitions, letters, diaries, these are not the only kinds of documents, but these are the kinds that, we started the project for. In 2018, we were approached by the Alabama Department of Archives and History and the Council of State Archivists to handle more structured data. And I'd like to show an example of that collaboration. This is a project at the Maryland State Archives that is working with marriage. They're not marriage certificates, they're marriage reports, so they're slightly different. And this is a project in which you can see this document is pretty simple, right? Claude Bowers, we switched to over and under, I think, right? Claude Bowers, chauffeur, there's lots of material in here, but the Maryland State Archives have set up this particular project just to collect the information that they want for finding this record. So they basically want a digital index into these documents. They're asking for first, middle, and last name of the groom and bride, and then a basic date of the marriage. And what that means is that once these are transcribed, they are able to export this whole project as a spreadsheet with a row per page and columns for groom first name, groom middle, groom last, ditto with bride. And that allows them to import this into any other system for creating real life digital finding aids. Another collaboration that we did with our friends in the State Archives deals with a different kind of structured record. A record like this, this is similar to the ones we were just looking at, except you can see there are multiple lines per page. So we have structured records that are, you have many, many records per page image. So this is from the Swedish National Archives, the Riksarkivet. And it's a fascinating project. This is the petition for the women's right to vote in 1922. So in Sweden, women didn't have the right to vote. And the Swedish populace, the Swedish female populace, put together petitions that went out to every little town. And some ridiculously large percentage of women signed on and said, yes, we want the right to vote. So this project, if you take a look at it, there is some information that this may look a little bit similar to the Baltimore city marriages. and that there are these header information, that essentially the county name and the place names. This is from Stockholm, the number of the page that was stamped on it. But then underneath that, you can see that they've configured this project with a spreadsheet component that is embedded in the web page. That lets people transcribe each one of these names. Again, they've defined the columns to be, I guess, forename and aftername. I guess that's first name and second name in Swedish, title, and these other kinds of fields that they're collecting. This also will be exportable as a spreadsheet. In this case, the spreadsheet would have a row for each one of these records. So there'd be a row for Edla Bergstrom and a row for Elizabeth Anderson. This is a pretty darned active project, and you can see some of the conversations that people are having, you know, which are pretty active. I mean, unfortunately, I don't read Swedish, but you know, there's a lot of back and forth collaboration between users who are volunteers working on this and people who are monitoring this. Every time someone leaves a note on a page, the next morning, the person who runs this project gets an email listing all the activity over the previous 24 hours, including all of the notes, so that they can easily come in and respond to any kind of questions or clarify any challenges people have made, or read about discoveries that volunteers have made as they work on these projects.
That's our favorite story about that was we one of our early projects was with a set of lighthouses off the Oregon coast, and they were transcribing the lighthouse keeper's logs, which was like a line a day of what was happening at the lighthouse. And there's this one line where it basically says, lifeboat came ashore, the keeper took the survivors to the doctor, and the assistant keeper buried the captain, or something along these lines, which is this kind of crazy thing that is just one line and one set of logbooks
Embedded within weather observations and how choppy
Yeah.
the sea were.
But the transcriber actually went and looked up what might have happened and found some contemporaneous newspaper accounts about a coal ship that had blown up like 200 miles off the coast of Oregon, and this was the survivors from it. So really neat kind of product that came out of this transcription was being able to write a small exhibit for the lighthouses about this shipwreck, and the fact that the shipwreck survivors came to this lighthouse. And
Yes, you can imagine the role of that lighthouse on the, you know, as they're stuck in a lifeboat, you know,
Yeah.
aiming towards that. That's incredibly powerful.
Our favorite projects, the ones that really have great collaboration between transcribers, you'll see them teasing each other and thanking each other in these notes. The UK National Archives has some volunteers who are really great at that, because they'll go off and do research and answer each other's questions, and it's really a community. And that's, to me, the holy grail of these types of projects, is to have that type of collaboration, that type of community growing from it.
So going back to more textual records, we have very little here to finish up. The tool can also be used for correcting OCR. So this is a project at Iowa State, working with their catalog of seed catalogs. And they have a couple of passes. One of them is coming in and correcting the OCR. Oh, someone's already working on this. Okay, they were not when I started. Okay, here's an example of uncorrected OCR, and you can see that they've pulled this in, and earliest tomato in the world is not correct, and I'm not going to change it here, but this is an example of another tool, another use of the tool to try to bring in raw material, raw text that's the result of automatic projects like OCR, and then correct it. And so we can pull text in from PDFs or text files that are uploaded. So the last kind of task that I wanted to talk about is the ability to create metadata associated with an item. So item level metadata creation. So this is an example from Dartmouth University Libraries. They're working with letters from an Arctic expedition to Wrangel Island. So we have people who are transcribing the documents and doing pretty substantial annotation, you can see. But as they transcribe, the next step is that they are prompted to create item level metadata. And it's pretty basic metadata. Who wrote these things? Who were the recipients? Give us a title for the document. But this is a neat way to take material that's been very lightly processed and come up with transcriptions, but also item level metadata from that.
And we figure the person who has just transcribed the document probably is in the best possible place for kind of providing this information about who wrote it and who it was to and from and where and when.
And you can see that that person can the person creating the metadata can view the image, they could view the text. If items were imported with their own metadata, they could look at old metadata to come up with new metadata for remediation. This item was not, it has none.
I know you didn't pull this up to show, but maybe some of the photo identification projects like the Indy Parks one.
Oh yeah, let me see if I can get that. That's a great one. Maybe you can describe the background on that.
So
pulling it up.
The Indianapolis Public Library kind of inherited a bunch of images from the Parks and Rec Department. And they were not very well described at all, and they didn't really know much about them. So what they asked people to do, oh, it looks like that's right, we've made this inactive.
Yes, they're done with the project.
Yeah, this was another of these kind of field-based projects like the marriage reports. But what they asked people to do was identify which park is it.
And then why? Why did they think so?
Mhm.
Right? And give us your comments on why this would be the case. So here's an example of somebody saying, oh, this image is from Rodius Park, and here's why I think so.
And this why is a lot of work that someone went and put in, right?
Yeah, this is pretty darn impressive, honestly. Yeah, and that is all done by volunteers. Now they're volunteers that the Indianapolis Public Library has recruited. So they are people who are probably knowledgeable about Indianapolis.
And that's what we find, like photo identification as a crowdsourcing task is hard, because it's hard unless you can scale it to a known set of things. So this whole collection is parks pictures. They're like, these pictures all have something to do with parks. And so then you can find people who are familiar with Indianapolis and the parks and things, and they can help you do this. Ohio University is doing actually a closed project with a bunch of dance posters, and they've invited alumni of their dance program to come in and help them transcribe. And really it's more about describing because it's a poster, right? But what's on the poster, but also anything that they know or remember, because they might have been in these performances,
right,
or went to the
help put them on or something. Yes,
exactly.
So let's kind of close out by talking about the sides that we haven't seen. Everything we've looked at so far is the perspective of kind of a volunteer or another end user, a student or some other volunteer. There are a lot of other tools that are really only visible to the people running the project. One of those is the ability to monitor volunteer activity. This is one of the projects that I run, and no one's doing anything on it right now because it's mostly complete. But you can see that we can pull out all the email addresses of people who have opted in to pull out maybe add them to a mailing list. We can see any new collaborators that have come in. We can download a report of approximate volunteer hours per person for the project that were spent during a time frame. Projects can be public or private, as I think I mentioned. This is a public project, but if I make it private, then I can designate who's allowed to see it. There are quite a few projects that are entirely private for, say, copyright reasons. In other cases, there are projects that are invitation only, like the Archives of Michigan working with the DAR volunteers. Finally, we can pull material out in dozens of formats. We can export everything as plain text, as PDFs, Microsoft Word, HTML, just all kinds of formats. We want to have as many on-ramps and off-ramps on the platform as possible. We want to keep the experience for the person transcribing very simple, but all of this on-ramp, off-ramp integration stuff, we're willing to go a little bit further on that. Lastly, getting material in, you could upload PDFs or import from a handful of providers. So that is the end of our demo. If you'd like to know more, obviously stick around, ask questions. We also wanted to mention that we are hosting 3 webinars coming up in the next 5 weeks. One
It's a lot more than we usually
Yes.
do, but
One on Friday is called Your First Crowdsourcing Project, and it's about the soft skills that are involved in these projects. How do you do outreach to potential volunteers? Once they've started, how do you keep them engaged?
Hello, how are you? I assume you're with JT?
yes.
And
Yes.
similar kinds of soft skills. The next one is on using ChatGPT with archival collections. That's August 14th, and this is actually going to be a presentation by a
Summer intern.
summer intern,
yeah.
yes, who's been researching ChatGPT all summer long with our guidance, and she's going to be describing all the things that she learned and everything that worked and everything that doesn't. And then finally, on September 21st, we'll be talking about using Whisper AI for transcribing audiovisual material, and that presentation will be by a staff member at University of North Texas Libraries. So yeah, so I will stop sharing my screen. I'm always happy to jump back in if anybody has questions. Yeah. So any questions or comments?
I know we were talking a little bit earlier, not on the recording, about some of the challenges with transcribing different texts and versions of like cursive or different handwritings. Can you guys just speak on that a little bit with like your findings with that in the site?
So
When we talk about it, we talk about kind of 2 different axes. One is the type of material. Is it a telegram, a letter, a court record? People have a lot of trouble with court records. There's so much legalese and things in it.
financial records and account books, that's a big deal. There's so much information in those, but definitely if you're new to them.
Oh, it's hard.
Yeah.
And then the other kind of axis is handwriting and styles of writing.
Yeah, and what we find is that large public projects tend to be ones that are 18th, 19th, or 20th century. There have been a few that we've worked on that were much older than that, but they tended to recruit from a narrow group of people. So the British Library hosted a project working with Arabic scientific manuscripts from the 11th through the 15th century, but they actually contacted and held an in-person transcribathon with Arabic speakers in London. And this is something that actually works for anything. It can work for a 20th century letter, is having an event in which you get lots of people together and you work through the document together, right? Them watching how you read, what kind of decisions you make, them potential volunteers say correcting you, right? Discussing this. It really, really helps get people over the hump. They don't feel lost and alone when they're confronted with cursive for the first time.
Definitely true in classrooms, like we've heard archivists talk about showing up to a classroom and doing this in front of the class as a way to help students get over the hump and to start, becoming a little bit more fluent in this. It also, people do this over Zoom or they do it in person. So, I think new things are hard for all of us. And so anything that you can do to kind of help people get used to it and practice together so that they can feel, you know, insecure and not very smart with a group of people around them who will help them kind of get past that. So
Yes.
there's a question on whether there's a cost to our webinars. Nope.
No, not at all.
We want people to show up and talk.
So this is John Nugent with the Missouri State Archives. We use the product, and each time when we launch a project, we have done a bad typing by John video, which we record. And so that's really good, or we hope it's really good that the volunteers see us making mistakes, and therefore it's kind of like validating that it's fine for them to make mistakes and learn as they go too. And it was effective before we were doing this remotely, but I think it's even more effective virtually.
And, you know, one of the things that we tried to build into From the Page is what Wikipedia calls collaborative knowledge creation, that this ability to go back and fix your own mistakes, something that 3 pages ago you hadn't figured out, but now you figured out, you can go fix it. And that's kind of cool.
Question: if we have an occasional document we can't read, can we be contacted on a case-by-case basis? So we're not actually handwriting experts. We kind of have learned a lot over the years just by contact. But I actually think that for very occasional documents, I think social media is a lot better place for that. The Archivist Think Tank group on Facebook has people posting just single documents that people can't figure out a few times a week, and you see 20 or 30 comments on there with people pitching in and saying, oh, here's what's going on, and you know, this obviously it's one of these, and you look at it, you're like, oh, that's not obvious to me, but glad you know, it makes sense in retrospect. So that would be my recommendation there.
Yes, thanks, John, for reminding us to post the full context when you post to social media. I know even off social media, sometimes we had when I was working at the St. John Museums, had our staff upstairs trying to work on a document, and they were like, I cannot figure this out. I can't read this. And she sent a text to the work group chat, and we were able to do kind of the same thing, just go through and like, oh, I think it's this, and you know, take different letters in context in the rest of the page. Like, no, his O's look like this, so that's not what that is. And it's really cool to have that, you know, support when you're like, I am just stuck. I have no idea what this is. It's starting to look and jumble into, I've looked at it too much. Somebody else has to have fresh eyes on it. I think that's a good aspect to this software too.
And I will say that one of my favorite interactions was when I saw 2 different transcribers who were working on the same page of one of our projects, and they started having a conversation about one of the people named in this account book. And as they're talking about people, one of them says, oh, I'm sure it's this because it's, you know, that person is actually my uncle or my great uncle. And the other person responded saying, oh, really? We must be cousins. And so, you know, that kind of fun little discovery through that collaboration.
John asks, who in the Midwest is using From the Page? Kansas State. Can we bring up a map so I can remember which states
Okay.
fall into the Midwest?
I'll take the geography question. Yeah, Kansas State, Iowa State, Ohio University libraries, then the state archives of Missouri, Wisconsin, Michigan,
Oh, University of Michigan.
Indiana. Oh, and University of Michigan.
Yeah.
I think that's it. They're
Indianapolis Public Library.
right.
The Frederick Douglass Papers is based out of Indiana University.
Right. I think that's it.
Could you sort of walk us through if someone has a project or thinks they have a project and they get in contact with you, walk us through what that entails, what sort of questions do you ask? What is the process?
This is actually one of our favorite things to do. What we really like doing is doing a deep dive in which we get on a Zoom call, one-on-one or one team and the other team. And we bring up examples of some of their documents that they're looking at working with, right? And we talk about how that might work in the system. We obviously don't have to do that for somebody like the Missouri State Archives that has run a number of these, right? They launch projects whenever they want to. They can go into the system, create a new collection, set up their transcription conventions, configure fields and spreadsheet columns if they need to, upload all their material and be off and running without any intervention on our part. But for a brand new organization, hopping on a call and talking through it is great. You might have other perspectives on it.
I'm sure part of the other question is how much does it cost, right? So we start at for single projects, small organizations, $100 a month, larger state archives and things that have a lot more material and many different collections can go up to about $6,000 a year. That's kind of the range. There's a pricing page, so we try to make it transparent. So parameters of test projects. You can run a trial with up to 200 pages.
Across as many projects as you want.
need, so you can try out different types of things. The challenge there is that we don't promote those projects to the volunteers on our platform, so you don't see the magic of the volunteers that we have. So we've been talking about how we could change that, and like we hate to volunteers get persnickety if you like don't pay attention to them and if nobody appreciates their work. So we don't really want to put projects that aren't serious in front of them.
We also don't want people getting discouraged by working on a project that then is pulled down or goes
Yeah.
nowhere, right?
Yeah.
That's not
So we're trying to figure out the right
Right.
place there. Use in remote work.
right. So this wasn't really a thing until March of 2020, and then it really was a thing. So there are quite a few organizations that use From the Page for remote staff work. That could be metadata creation, that could be transcription. So the Beinecke Library at Yale used From the Page for transcribing letters of 20th century authors. And all that was private because those are still under copyright by the literary estates. Similarly, the Wisconsin Historical Society, at one point, I heard that this was the only way that a majority of hourly staff members were able to log time on their timesheet was by transcribing the material that had been posted by the archives.
We've also heard some colleges and universities use it with student workers, either on site or remotely. And definitely when COVID hit, they were doing a lot of that. What I'd love to see more of is, we showed that metadata form that Dartmouth's using at the end of a transcription of, it was a telegram in that case, but all of those documents. You could do just metadata around a document. You don't have to do full transcription. So I would really be interested in seeing, institutions pulling material in and just being able to work remotely on describing the material and then being able to export a spreadsheet. We're not seeing a lot of that yet, but I think, it's definitely doable.
And that's
the system.
That's something, in the museum context that could also work with images of objects, right? That's a situation where you wouldn't need to start with archival documents, right? You could have photos, you could have statues, you could have a series of photos of the same painting and have a metadata creation form to let people, create metadata, item level metadata remotely.
To kind of further maybe suggest an answer for Anselm's question too, I would encourage people that haven't used a platform to just go and create a login and do a little indexing on a variety of projects. That will kind of inform you maybe as much as anything besides sitting down with Ben and Sarah and going through a project. Because even with our projects, they're very different than the 4 active projects we have right now. And ours are very, very different from a lot of other projects. as well.
John or Christina, you want to drop a link to kind of your landing page in the chat? I think, having things from your state is always good. And oh, I guess I could go find it. There we go.
There we are. Yay.
Oh, thank you, Leon.
Well, I think that's about all we have, unless there are any other comments or questions.
Thanks a lot for your time.
Yeah,
Thanks.
sure thing. Yeah, thanks for coming, everyone.
All right, well, as a reminder, I will go ahead and put the recording link to our YouTube. I'll include the link from the Missouri State Archives from the page, since that was shared, and then the link for those upcoming webinars, and get those out to everybody so we can all have that as a reminder for some follow-up. But thank you, Ben and Sarah, for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you.